Okay, get this rolling here. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our latest in our webinar series. So this is where Key Caliber talks about how to implement NIST CSF. So for those of you who were with us last month, we discussed the first category, identify, and this month we delve into the second category, protect. And so we take lots of feedback from folks who have attended our webinars, and you'll see a few changes in how we present today. We start with a little bit of background on Key Caliber and my background. We've also shortened this to 30 minutes, and we welcome any other feedback and any questions that you have. So please feel free to jot down questions as we go along, and I'll answer them at the end. And please reply to our survey afterwards and let us know what you think. All right, so getting rolling. So just a little bit of background on Key Caliber. So we have a risk-informed asset management platform. And what it does is automatically and continuously identify and visualize all of the cyber assets that you have in your environment. And then it goes a step further to also distinguish which are the most important and which are the most at risk, so that you can prioritize accordingly. So sometimes I will mention Key Caliber as being part of a solution for some of what we'll cover in these NIST CSF discussions, but these webinars are not meant to be a big product, a very long infomercial on Key Caliber. And just so you know, my background here, the reason why I can speak about these issues is because I've spent many years in the cybersecurity industry. So this is my second cybersecurity startup. The first one, UpLevel, was acquired by McAfee. And both of my startups have been based very heavily on my previous operational experience. So during the Obama administration, I led cybersecurity operations for the Executive Office of the President. And before that, I led malware and forensics teams at the Department of Homeland Security in the division that was then called US CERT. And I also have experience on the private sector side. I was doing forensics at Ernst & Young for a while. All right, so let's hop into NIST CSF. So this framework was built originally for critical infrastructure, has been expanded beyond that. And what it is fundamentally is a risk-based approach to managing cybersecurity that utilizes global standards and guidelines and practices. Version 1.1 is in operation now, but there's a movement to move to version 2.0, which will probably happen sometime next year. And so feedback is being solicited because it is based on standards and guidelines and best practices, and that has evolved and improved over the last few years. And it's designed to be very broad and flexible, so it could be used by different types of organizations, regardless of their size. And for those of you who attended our webinar last month, you'll see that these are repeat slides because it's just setting the groundwork on NIST CSF. So you have a background on it, but I always do my slides slightly differently because I do not, as you can probably tell, memorize my slides. So each time it'll come out a little bit differently. So what part of the beauty of NIST CSF is it allows you to state what your current posture is, and you can do the same in terms of your aspirational posture. And then you can see where there are the gaps, so you can start to move in the direction you want to go in and see how well you're progressing towards that target state. And that allows for communicating cyber risk in a way that is understandable to those who are not in cybersecurity. And for those of us in the industry, we recognize that this is becoming a bigger and bigger challenge, and something that we do need to be more efficient at is being able to articulate what the problems are from a cybersecurity perspective, but in a way that will resonate with those who don't understand the nuances of the industry. So there are three big components to the framework: the core, the tiers, and the profile. So the core, that's the 5 categories that we think about when we think of NIST CSF. And so in our last webinar, we covered identify, and this one will cover protect, and in the next 3 months, we'll finish the rest of the circle. And the tiers, this is a quasi-maturity model. This is showing how the organization is doing with respect to a couple different areas, and how it can move towards a more mature state in terms of meeting the elements that are included in the framework. And at the very end, I'll show how you can map the core capabilities to these tiers. And then the profile is just looking at all of the categories and the posture and state for an organization in all those categories. And of course, you can create the current state profile as well as the aspirational target state profile. So the core has the functions, and today we're focusing on the protect function. And each of those functions are broken up into a number of categories, and then those categories are broken down into subcategories. And we're going to cover all of the categories and subcategories for protect today. And then there are lots of informative resources that map to other security standards. I will not be getting into any of that. But for those who are heavy on the compliance side, that may be of interest to you. So let's get started. So the protect function supports the ability to limit or contain the impact of a potential cybersecurity event. That's a NIST CSF terminology here. Now, so it's what you consider your basic blocking and tackling. And it's what people often think about at first when they think about cybersecurity. Now, I do want to point out here, this is our very own view of the world of showing NIST CSF as a pyramid, and this is intentional because all of the categories build on each other. And so we spent lots of time last month talking about identify. You want to have identify squarely done and in place and effective, and then you build on top of it. If you don't have identify done well, then your protect function is not going to be operating at its optimal capacity. So I just want to make sure we recognize that should be the building blocks should be done in the order of taking care of the base first. And we'll see in a couple instances when we talk about protect how identified data will play into it. So the protect function is to develop and implement appropriate safeguards to ensure delivery of critical services. So I'm highlighting this concept of critical services because the reality is at the end of the day, you cannot take care of everything. And you have to be selective about what gets the most attention. And so that again goes to why identify needs to be done and needs to be done well. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through all of these subcategories and discuss all the components of them. And I break it down into looking at the technology that you can potentially apply. In some cases, you can't, there's no technology that's going to meet the subcategory. But when there is, I include that. And then I mention the processes that are involved for each subcategory, as well as the different teams that could be involved in it. So let's get started here. Identity management and access control. So that is where you're making sure that the physical and logical assets and where they're housed have the proper access controls on them. So you're just looking at authorized users, processes, and devices, and that the level in which you are buttoning up the access is consistent with the risk. And again, this goes to that same point of need to know the identify stage of it, and need to know when there are assets that are critical assets, when there are critical applications, and those need a higher level of access control than something that doesn't have the potential to get to anything that's critical. So a lot going on here. So the identities and credentials are issued and managed and all of that. There are plenty of technologies now that are doing some form of that. You might need one of these, you may need a couple of them, but IAM, CASB, SSO, NAC, these are just some of the solutions that work. You'll see so this category in general has lots of technologies that can work. Utilize the technologies. I strongly recommend that. And when with physical access, you can add technology to that in many cases. Everyone had a swipe card at some point or another. And remote access, again, lots of solutions, all the ones that I already mentioned, VPN's another option. And for all three of these first ones here, the process is pretty much the same, where you need an access management policy. And that's where you have your different access levels. You decide who is entitled to those access levels. And then a big point is that you revoke that access as soon as they're no longer there. And this we see time and time again is where employees could have left a year ago or 3 years ago and they still have access. And that's a big problem. So any program for access management needs to be able to close that loop and close that loop efficiently. And then the folks involved in these first three, it's certainly cybersecurity and IT, and in the case of the physical asset access, then you have physical security involved as well. In terms of least privilege and separation of duties, so this gets into a concept that's very in vogue now of zero trust. So solutions that allow for that are privileged access management. It's where you can incorporate the same technologies as we already mentioned, and then some of these others that are more specific. And I include key caliber here from the standpoint of the process should include incorporating an understanding of what the critical assets are, critical applications are, because those are the ones where you want to make sure that you're really honing in on the principles of least privilege and zero trust, and you're segmenting to make sure that they're well buffered. And then the process is the same in terms of being able to first identify the crown jewels, and then you go through that same access management policy implementation. And so for zero trust, network segmentation, both of those areas, again, it's cybersecurity and IT, ideally working hand in hand with this. In terms of identities being proofed and bound to credentials, again, lots of technology solutions, and it's a cybersecurity and IT responsibility based on the access management policy. And this last one here, this is bringing to the fore the concept of the access levels and the restrictions and the amount of effort that's put into that process being consistent with the risk. So and that's why I key caliber on this one, because we compute risk, we show the crown jewels, and then that can go into how you decide what level of access control and what level of protections you have in place. All right, so now let's move on to awareness and training. And so this is the standard concept of getting everyone at least a basic understanding of cybersecurity and it being an issue. Same way that organizations have to train folks on physical security. You don't want to just let anyone in the building. It's the same kind of concept from a cyber perspective. So in this one, it's all about training. So all users informed and trained. There are a number of solutions now that provide this type of security awareness training or phishing training and whatnot. And so that is a good way to get everyone filled in on the basics. I will note, though, that when it comes to that, you don't want to be in the position of basically shaming people when they fall for a phishing email or something along those lines. That doesn't help the situation any. You have to just turn it into a teaching moment of, look, you clicked, but here's why that wasn't what you wanted to do. And some of the solutions are good at being delicate about that at this point. A lot of them back in the days used to be a lot more abrupt and aggressive in a way that I think was negative, and didn't help with the ultimate goal of making people more informed. And so how, in terms of the processes that are involved, you need to have, you know, your standard IT and security policy, or maybe it's your employee handbook, something along those lines, where it's specifying this. And then you have a training program that you build and that you're providing on a regular basis, and you're updating that as necessary. So we'll say we have the person who runs our security awareness training. She is constantly updating the training, and also informing the entire team when there are new threats that need to be recognized, and the team needs to be alerted on it. And that's an ideal situation, because then you're making sure it's when there's something that's relevant in the real world, it's getting to the employees in a timely manner. So the folks involved in the training side, so it could be cybersecurity, possibly IT, and sometimes legal gets involved in that policy side of it. Now, for the privileged access users, and I'm going to skip down also to senior executives. So these are ones where they're in sort of a different situation, where they need to potentially know more about the threats than just the average user in the environment. And so sometimes there are technologies that can help with that, but sometimes that's going to be very specialized to your environment, and you're just going to need to develop those programs for those that subset of users that then needs to have a better understanding of what are the challenges and what are the concerns given their roles within the organization. And then we'll go to the third one here, the third-party stakeholders. And this, again, it's going to vary depending on how the company wants to do it and how the legal and risk teams want to handle it. But we talked about this in our previous session on identify how having a third-party risk management policy allows for stipulating how you want to handle those interactions, and how you can gather the right information on the third-party vendors and partners and service providers to make sure that they're following the standards that they need to. And then on this fifth one here, the physical and cybersecurity personnel. So again, this is looking at it from the perspective of, you know, you can't dissociate the two completely. There are times where the physical security, if you have, say, a data center, comes into play from a cyber perspective, and so that's when you need to bring physical security into the discussion as well. All right, so moving right along, looking at data security. Again, looking at what data you have, and then making sure that you're protecting it from the standpoint of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the cybersecurity triad, consistent with the risk strategy. So focusing more on the data that's super important. So data at rest, data in transit, lots of encryption technologies have to use that. And incorporate that into your IT and security policy, and also your data management policies. And those policies can be drafted with legal involved in some cases, especially if you're dealing with PHI or PII or something along those lines. So making sure that there's the proper disposal process. That's an area where, again, a technology that's asset management, like Key Caliber or one of the others, can help with identifying when there are assets that, for example, should have been removed and haven't. We see this as one of our use cases where it's an asset is thought to be decommissioned, and then the folks in the security team will look at Key Caliber's resilience graph and see there's still connections to it, and know that has not been done properly. So having an IT and security policy and asset management policy that stipulates exactly how to handle that, important and needs to be followed. In ensuring that the capacity is available, you know, for cloud environments, that's often squared away by the cloud providers. You do want to know what your crown jewels are, particularly when you're looking at this, because the availability of those need to be prioritized, and that's where you may have service level agreements and the like to keep them up and running. In terms of protecting against data leaks, well, so there's data loss prevention and privacy management solutions. Some EDR in some cases can help with this. And in fact, I would say your whole security stack in many ways is involved in this. Again, understanding what the crown jewels are so that you know your security stack is focused on them. Important part of making sure that that's done effectively. And so that could bring in risk and privacy in addition to cybersecurity and IT. Whoops. In terms of integrity, so for number 6 and number 8 there, so in the integrity, that's a little bit trickier. You know, it's not one of the areas that's very well covered with security technologies. You maybe have some firmware security or file integrity monitoring, maybe sometimes just hashing ends up working. And so with that, you want to define a process. This is an area that's not very, very common in this industry to have a whole policy around checking the integrity, but it's something that you know probably should be added to, either if it doesn't have its own standalone policy, at least be added to one. And then in terms of testing, in terms of making sure that you have prod distinguished from testing environments, so that's certainly something we can help with. Other products, other asset management products could potentially as well. But that's where you have to bring in engineering into the conversation also, because they need to be part of that conversation. All right, so moving right along. This is a very long one. Information protection processes and procedures. So this is, you know, adding in all your policies. And so there's not going to be a ton of technology that's involved in this, because it's processes and policies. So baseline configuration, that's sort of a more advanced concept. And so sometimes you can get it going where you have, okay, this is our standard build, and so you can see aberrations from it. And that's, again, cybersecurity and IT involved. When it comes to a life cycle, a system development life cycle or change management, you need to have the specific policies for it. There's just nothing on the technology side. When it comes to backing up, absolutely, you want to have technology that is doing those automated backups and allows for easy retrieval. And then, you know, having a process, a policy around backups, disaster recovery, business continuity, those are quite standard. And so when you're building out those policies, IT and engineering need to be in those conversations so they understand their roles. And then in terms of the physical operating environment, that's where you have your physical security policy, you involve the physical security team. And the concept of destroying the data, there are plenty of data wiping solutions. Having a whole process in place for how you handle that. You know, if you have a situation where, say, you need to, based on what the customer's requirements are, or based on what's going on in your environment, you need to be able to confirm that you've properly destroyed the data. You need to have a process in place for that. Again, so this one is a very long category, 12 components. And again, not a ton on the technology side, because it's looking at more of the processes. So the concept of continual improvement, that's something that requires having some metrics. So you measure it and you can prove it. And then doing some sort of way of evaluating against those metrics on a regular basis. Similarly, with the effectiveness of technologies, there are some cybersecurity testing and validation products. It's the only one in this bunch that has some technology associated with it. And again, basing it on the metrics and regularly scheduled evaluations allows you to see how you're trending with that. And then these other ones are your response and recovery plans, and that's kind of table stakes. You need to have that early on, and testing it by using tabletop exercises. Great way to test. The other way to test is by having an incident. So ideally you're testing with tabletops as opposed to real life scenarios. Incorporating the human resources side of it, that's getting into the security awareness training. And so that's part of your IT and security policy or your employee handbook. And then also it throws in vulnerability management, which is a policy and a plan unto itself. All right, and then in terms of maintenance and repair. So this is a short one. So here, you have the technology that you're working with. So one of my key points is with this is, if you're working with other technologies, you want to have the user manuals for those other technologies in a spot that's readily accessible. And you need to have your change management policies in place so that when there needs to be tweaking done, you have a way of doing that. Similarly, if those products are being maintained remotely, there's a process in place for how to do that. And I see we're running a tad late on time here. Bear with me, folks. I've got about 2 more minutes here. Okay, and so then I think this is our final category, the protective technology. And so this is kind of the heart of what people think about when they're thinking of this protect category. And that's all the products, the security stack that allow you to ensure the security and resilience of your systems and assets. And so with this, having a way of logging the different technologies in the stack, you can certainly use log management or SIM technology for that, and having the right policies in place for how you're going to log, what's going to alert, that allows you to use those logs effectively. Protecting removable media and making sure you're restricting it as necessary. Sometimes you can do this at the workstation level, and so you have the right policies in place to say, for example, no removable media is allowed, and then you lock it down, lock down the devices so that it's not accessible. Principle of least functionality, that's getting to same kind of concept as zero trust, and you define that in your access management policies. Not really technology involved in that. For protecting your communication and controls, that goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning with all of the technologies that can help with that, and having the right policies from a network and communication standpoint to support that. And then having these concepts in place to making sure that you're staying up even when something goes down. You can use load balancers, you can use backup technologies. Again, I recommend using our technology Caliber to identify what are the assets and applications that really need to have that high level availability, and you need to really jump on if there is an issue. I would add to this, this is a few years old now, and I would say that there are certainly a couple of additional areas where, in addition to securing the network and making sure that you're locking down the removable media, I would add email security, endpoint security, cloud and container security. I mean, there's lots more that could be beefed up in this category. All right, in terms of using the tiers, again, I look at this as like tier 1 is essentially you're just doing everything ad hoc. Tier 2 is where you have it sort of at the business unit level. There's some security going on, but then a tier 3 is where you get to it being essentially organization-wide, where it's being incorporated. And then tier 4 is the really mature state where you're having a more proactive approach to it. And so I've mapped out for each of those subcategories where they would fit. So you want to start with just getting tier 1 down and then work your way up from there. And here are some resources if you'd like to learn more about NIST CSF or want to watch our first video on our webinar on Identify, which we did last month. And that's all we have for today. So thank you so much for joining us. Please give us your feedback as we continue to develop this webinar series and our webinars in general. And thank you all for joining us. Have a great day. Take care.